upgrade your home theater from blah to Bravia, look no further than the Sony BRAVIA Theater Bar 9. While you can purchase just the soundbar on its own, you can also expand the setup with a subwoofer and satellites, sold separately of course. How's that for alliteration? Hi, I'm Vanessa from Ratings.com. Today's review of the Sony Theater Bar 9 is going to be a little different. We've tested the bar as both an expanded unit and as a standalone bar, so you can really see if those extra bells and whistles are worth it. Especially because Sony doesn't exactly make it easy to buy the setup as a whole kit. For starters, this is a 7.14 setup. The soundbar itself is a 5.02 configuration, but with the two Sony SA-RS5 satellites, you add on 2 additional surround channels and 2 additional upfiring channels. The Sony SA-SW5 then brings out the bass to round out that lower end. The soundbar is very well built, mostly covered with nicely textured fabric. It's pretty long, and it's low enough that it won't block out the bottom of your TV. The SA-RS5 satellites look similar to the HTA9 speakers of yore, but they're smaller and darker in color. And the sub has a front-facing driver, a down-firing passive radiator, and a port along the bottom of each of the cabinet's 4 sides. This is the same sub used for the BRAVIA Theater Quad and HTA9 setup as well. So if you already have it, it works here too. Just keep in mind that the sub is a bit on the bigger side if your space is small. So how does it sound? Well, that depends on what you're listening to and watching. Let's break it down. When used for stereo audio, it definitely leans a bit bassy. The mid-range sounds pretty balanced for clear dialogue, while the treble range is a bit more excited and brighter for a crisp top end. There's a slight issue with stereo playback though. It's more apparent when listening to music rather than with audio of shows or movies. Essentially, the audio will play through both satellites, even if the sound is only meant to come through one side, which can be a bit distracting if you want to really appreciate the fidelity of the mix. But otherwise, if you're getting this setup to enjoy movies and shows in your home theater kingdom, you'll be pleased. Its discrete center channel is great, so dialogue sounds clear and balanced. While the satellites and sub reproduce center channel audio, you can also use your TV speakers if you have a compatible Sony BRAVIA TV. Though, this can dull the sound of dialogue depending on how good your TV speakers really are. Its surround sound performance is a bit bass heavy, so expect a lot of rumble and boom, especially during busy action sequences. The treble and mids can be veiled by this, so it may be harder to make out dialogue during those cinematic sequences. Dolby Atmos content sounds more balanced than 5.1 sound, at least in the higher registers. But the heavier bass de-emphasizes fine details in the treble a bit. The soundbar itself has 2 upfiring speakers, plus additional upfiring channels in the satellite and sub, so it does add some nice height to Atmos content. That said, it's not the most immersive Atmos experience. There's a decent amount of height, but not much depth, with a bit of muddled tracking regarding sounds that move in the mix. On the bright side, the soundbar gets loud enough to fill the room without too much compression. We recommend using the auto-adjust volume function because the soundbar is noticeably quieter with it off. Now that we've covered the basics, it's time to talk about customizability. Most of the sound enhancements are on or off settings. If you typically like to adjust the sound manually with an equalizer, your EQ control is limited to 3 base settings adjusted with a remote or app. Most other settings are pre-configured or automated by the bar, making setup a painless experience needing only room calibration. The remote has some other essentials like night and voice modes, plus sound field optimization to expand the soundstage. Functions like 360 spatial sound mapping and auto-adjust volume are accessible via the app, and we suggest enabling these for the best performance. Auto DRC for dynamic range compression can be useful for shows with poorly mixed audio. There's a single HDMI in port and 1 ARC port. Good news though, when your soundbar supports pretty much every format, even Dolby Atmos and IMAX Enhanced DTS, compatibility isn't a huge issue. Though, if you need to connect it to older devices with an optical port, the bar doesn't have it. For current and next-gen consoles like the PlayStation 5 Pro, the bar supports HDMI 2.1 passthrough up to 4K at 120 Hz. Latency is a bit elevated across the board. You'll probably need to compensate for that in the app though, which could be an issue for some games. The bar supports most wireless connections like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Apple AirPlay 2, and Spotify Connect. So with all of this in mind, should you buy this soundbar and all of its bells and whistles? Well, for home theater folks needing extensive audio format support, this 7.14 setup covers a lot of ground. There are a few concerns, of course. The stereo playback sending panned audio to both channels and the lack of clarity with surround sound are a bit of an annoyance for the audio-focused among us. Plus, if you have a mix of older and newer devices, the absence of an optical port might be a pain too. You can just get away with the bar, no sub, no satellites. The trade-off is exactly what you'd expect going from a 7.14 to a 5.02 setup. Less low-end reproduction, worse surround sound performance, and less height with Atmos content. But you still end up with a balanced sound profile and clear center channel dialogue. So, if you're looking to just boost the audio of your living room setup, the bar can do that for you for a hefty price. But if you want the whole home theater experience, there are better options than the BRAVIA Theater Bar 9 with a subwoofer and satellites, such as the Samsung HWQ990D. This bar ticks all the same boxes and then some. It sounds great out of the box, and it has a slightly better soundstage. It adds a second HDMI in port and an optical port, which the Sony lacks. If you want to do more in-depth sound tweaking, the Samsung includes a graphic EQ, though it only works in standard mode. Like the Sony, it can keep up with the latest generation gaming consoles too. Between the two, its latency is lower as well. It's also quite a bit cheaper than the BRAVIA Theater Bar 9. And so we've reached the end. Bravo, brava, BRAVIA. If you want more on the Sony BRAVIA Theater Bar 9 with speakers and bass module, as well as our review for it as an all-in-one soundbar without the speakers and sub, check out the full review on our website. You can find the link in the description box below. Until next time, I'm Vanessa from Ratings.com, where we help you find the best product for your needs. Goodbye! Functions like 360 spatial sound mapping and auto adjust volume. I'm gonna pump myself up for this. Auto adjust volume are accessible via the app. Okay. Sorry.